Hey everyone, thanks for joining. This is Mike Drotis, Bible teacher and preacher, and we are studying about the last days. This is lesson number 3 in our continued studying on the last days. If you haven't seen the last 2 lessons, please go back into the YouTube channel and catch up on lessons 1 and 2. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, I encourage you to do so because every time I put out a new message or a new lesson, you will be able to get notified of that and you can get caught up to date as quickly as possible. Today I want to continue talking about where we left off. If you remember, last time we were talking, Adam and Eve had sinned and they were expelled from the garden. God did not want Adam to eat from the tree of life. And in Genesis chapter 3, verse 22, he says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat it and live forever." There were 2 trees that God mentioned in Genesis, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Adam had already eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he died spiritually that day. Had he eaten from the tree of life, he would have lived for eternity in a spiritually dead condition, and God did not want that to happen. So the Bible continues, "Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the garden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword, which turned every way, to guard the way to the tree of life." And we don't hear any more about the tree of life until the very end of the Bible in Revelation chapter 22. We were introduced to the tree of life in Genesis chapter 3, and then in Revelation 22, verse 1, it's back. And God says, "And he showed me a pure river." This is John speaking of a vision. "A pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of its street, and on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month." What was lost in paradise, we will regain once we get into the new heaven. And so that tree of life is available for us. Once we get to heaven, we can eat from the tree of life once again. But at this point in time, Adam was expelled from the garden and he was forbidden to eat from the tree of life, and an angel actually protected him from doing such. Then we read in Genesis chapter 4 that Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." I believe this statement is very interesting, because if you remember in our last lesson, God told Satan that from the seed of a woman there would come one who would crush his head. Satan was on high alert for this, and he was watching Adam and Eve very closely. And when they had a child, Eve said, "I've had a man." I'm firmly convinced that Adam and Eve and Satan themselves all thought that this was the child that was going to dispose Satan and get Adam and Eve back in right standing. So Satan watched. Then she bore again, this time his brother. And now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So now we have 2 sons born to Adam and Eve. And verse 3, "And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel in his offering." Cain and Abel wanted to worship God. They wanted to draw near to God in the garden, and it says that each one of them brought God an offering. Cain brought from the fruit of the ground. He brought an offering to God. And Abel brought a blood sacrifice, a slain lamb from the first of his flocks to God. God respected or was pleased with Abel's offering, but Cain's he was not. And Cain became very angry at this. Verse 5, "But he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is at the door, and its desire is for you shall rule over it. Many people have talked about the two offerings. Why did God not accept Cain's offering, and why did God accept Abel's offering? It's very simple. He had instructed them from years past on that the only way to come to God was through a blood offering. For without the remission of sin, for without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Cain was giving vegetables and fruit from the ground, but Abel was giving the blood sacrifice, killing an innocent animal and offering it to God. And that was the way that God wanted them to make offerings. It all was pointing to what one day God would do through Jesus, his son, who would give us the spotless, sinless Lamb of God that would take away the sins of the world. But Cain didn't like that. He was upset, and God had told him, if you will just do the offering the right way, everything will be fine. But Cain wasn't about to do that. And then in verse 8, now Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. And there you have the first murder on the earth. And Satan had thought he had won. Satan had taken the firstborn, who he thought was going to destroy him, and he had turned him against God. And then he killed the secondborn, who was worshiping God the way that God wanted men to worship him. Surely Satan thought that now God would realize that this futile attempt of creating men to worship him would not work. And in the long run, God would realize that Satan was right and let Satan back into his good graces. But no, that's not exactly what was going to happen, because God always has a plan. God always has a way. God wasn't about to give up on Adam and Eve. God wasn't about to just throw away the whole plan because something went wrong. God had another plan, and God will never give up on you, and he will never give up on me. He didn't give up on Adam and Eve. And so Satan once again didn't figure the whole thing out. So even though Satan didn't stop God's plan, he did now have a family of men that he could work with. For he had Cain as his complicit family that he could work with on the earth. And in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16, we read about the separation that the sin that Cain created had caused. He had to leave the family. He had to leave his family and go somewhere else. And in verse 16 we read, then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Cain had to leave his family. Cain had to leave the presence of the Lord. And he left, and he took his family with him. And in verse 17, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city. So Cain left with his wife, and in the process of time, his wife had a child, and they began to build a family line. Not only did his wife follow Cain, but Satan and the watchers followed Cain. And they stayed close to this family. And as you can see, the line of Cain continued on until there was a man in verse 19 that we read about. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwelt in the tents and had livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of those who played the harp and flute. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, the instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. So as Cain's family is continuing to go forward, we see this man Lamech, who had 2 wives, and he had 3 sons. And each one of the sons was a pioneer in a certain area, in a certain field. The first son, Jubal, was the father of those who dwell in tents and of livestock. I believe that this was when man began to domesticate livestock. And the second one was Jubal, father of those who played music, harps and flutes. Flute also is translated pipe. Isn't it interesting that one of the very first people on the earth, Satan was already introducing music and pipes and flutes. Satan, remember, had built-in pipes when he was in the eternity past. And once again, now he's beginning to introduce this to this man named Jubal. And then the third guy, Tubal-Cain, was an instructor and a craftsman of bronze and iron. Now, we might not really understand what the significance of someone doing bronze and iron, but Tubal-Cain was doing something before the flood that it took 1,500 years after the flood for men to begin to understand how to use metal and how to create bronze and how to create iron. What I'm proposing is that these men, this family of Cain, had assistance through the watchers who were beginning to interject knowledge into their family. And as they interjected knowledge, they also interjected sin. Because look at Lamech, what he says. In verse 23, then Lamech said to his wives, Ada, Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Lamech and the spirit of murder was still in this family. Lamech had murdered a man just like Cain had murdered somebody. And this irreverent poem shows that sin was progressing in this family of Cain as the watchers were beginning to infiltrate and manipulate and control these men who have left God, and now they were drawn towards something else. Now in chapter 5 we read about Adam, because Adam and Eve had other sons. And Adam in verse 2, and he created them male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. Verse 3, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness and after his own image, and his name was Seth. And if we read about this line that came from Adam, this godly line, we read that there were 10 generations that existed before the flood. And the 7th generation was a man named Enoch that I want to talk to you about. Look at Genesis chapter 5, verse 18. Jared lived 160 years and he begot Enoch. After he begot Enoch, Jared lived another 800 years. Verse 20, so all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Verse 21, Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch, as some have said, was the very first prophet of God. He was the 7th from Adam. He lived 365 years. He didn't die. He walked with God, and God took him to heaven. Enoch is mentioned 2 other times in the Bible. He's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 in the heroes of faith, and he's also mentioned in Jude, where Jude actually quotes Enoch in one of his writings, the book of Enoch. In Jude, he actually quotes Enoch when Enoch is explaining what it's going to be like when the Lord returns. So Enoch, we'll get to Enoch at another time, but Enoch is a very interesting person. And in the days of Enoch, while he was alive, some things began to get really crazy on the earth. Satan had realized that there was these men that were worshiping God. He had Cain's family, but he didn't have the whole world. So Satan realized that there would still come someone sometime from the seed of a woman who would crush his head and destroy him. And so he had to figure out a way to stop this. And what Satan proposed to do was demonically evil, and it could end in a catastrophe for the entire world. So look at Genesis chapter 6. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they pleased. Satan had realized that from the seed of a woman would come this one who would crush his head. So Satan did something that was totally forbidden by God. But he convinced some of his watchers, some of his followers, for them to go ahead and leave this angel abode where they were living in the earth, and to come down to the earth and take women as their wives. This was strictly forbidden. God did not want them to do that, and he told them not to do that. But some of these demonic angels decided to select women as wives, and from them they had offspring that were giants. And the Lord said in verse 3, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." Verse 4, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and afterwards when the sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who are of old, men are renowned." Now some have said, "But Brother Mike, it says the sons of God." Yes, it does. But we must remember to use Bible to interpret Bible. And in Job chapter 38, it talks about the sons of God who were the angels. And so it was these demonic angels, these demons that were cast out of heaven to the earth, that Satan convinced to go and genetically pollute the DNA of mankind. Now you may be saying, this is a little preposterous, this is a little far out there. We all know that giants are simply a myth, a fairy tale. Is it really? Are giants really a fairy tale? All through history, we have seen bones and evidence of discoveries of gigantic bones, of civilizations where there is not just one giant, but giants. More bones have been found worldwide. Burial mounds in the United States, in the very United States in the 1800s. There are burial mounds that were dug up, and newspapers reported on this. I've seen many newspaper articles about these giant bones. There have been Indian legends of a race of giants that the Plains Indians were fighting. Giant men of stature with red hair that these Indians would have to fight. On Easter Island, 100 years ago, when this island was discovered, it was reported that there were two groups of people. There were normal-sized people, and then there was a race of giants that lived there. Even during the Afghan War in the 90s, there was the report of the Kandahar giant. The American soldiers were on patrol, and they found a cave, and it was littered with bones. And inside the cave, there was this giant man, and he was clothed in leather armor, and he had a spear, and he attacked the soldiers and killed some of them. Later on, the soldiers went back, and they destroyed that giant, and it says that the Black Ops came and took this secret giant away so that no one could see it. All of these things you can fact find for yourself. There are giants. All you have to do is just do a little research and find out for yourself. So not only were there giants on the earth before the flood, there were giants after the flood, because David even talks about fighting giants. Not only did these giants begin to pollute and affect the DNA on the earth, they also affected everything. Every animal, every creature. Verse 5, Then the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, that every intent of thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth. The whole earth was corrupted by this evil. And the Lord said in verse 7, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, every creeping thing, every bird, for I am sorry that I made them. So the whole earth was defiled and corrupted, genetically corrupted. Surely Satan thought, now there's no way that a seed of the woman could affect me because I've corrupted the entire genetic human genome. Things got so bad that God was sorry he made man. But all was not lost. And as we close today, I want to introduce to you God's answer to this problem. Verse 9, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. Even though the entire earth was corrupt, even though mankind was corrupt, even though the animals were corrupt, God found one man that I believe that was genetically still pure. In Genesis 7:1, it says, I have seen that you are righteous before me. In Lamentations 1:18, righteous is also defined as clean. Noah was genetically undefiled, and that was somebody that God could use. And so God began a new plan whereby he would wipe out the evil earth, the evil creatures, the evil giants, the defiled genetics, and he would begin anew on the other side of the flood. You say, well, how does all this deal with the end times? Look real quick as we come to a close, Matthew chapter 24. Jesus is talking about his return. He says, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father. What is a sign of Jesus' return? But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. During Noah's time, Satan was corrupting the DNA. He was corrupting man, and he was defiling men. And in the last days, we are seeing the same thing begin to happen. Genetic DNA enhancements are happening. Satan is trying to stop God from coming back, and he's trying to destroy mankind once again. We'll continue on next week as we study more about what is happening in the last days. Thank you. God bless.